Okay, here we go. Tom, they're seeing what you are seeing now, the first slide, which is plants through geological time. That's the title slide.
Okay. Very good. Well, the idea for this talk is based on the variety of plant fossils that I collected from across the United States. So I'm attempting to present plant evolution over geologic time. It gave me a chance to learn more and be able to present to other fossil collectors some basic information about changes in plant over the geologic time and how these changes affected other animals and their environment. I also want to thank Dr. Harry Alden, PhD in biology, who kindly added to and critiqued my presentation. This is not a botany class, but hopefully we're going to have some fun and see some interesting things. Next slide, please.
Go ahead.
Okay, so plant life begins the food chain. Plants provide both food for animals and the oxygen that they need to breathe. Plants have chlorophyll, which uses sunlight to produce food for the plant. This process is called photosynthesis. Using carbon dioxide in seawater or in the atmosphere, the plant changes the carbon into a sugar and releases oxygen. Plants are the source of practically all the oxygen in our atmosphere. Next slide, please. The Precambrian period represents 80% of all geologic time. Oceans formed about 3.83 billion years ago. Bacteria with chlorophyll, cyanobacteria, and algae were the first plants. Living symbiotically, cyanobacteria and algae captured sediment and formed mounds and mats beginning about 3.46 billion years ago. These rock-like formations are called stromatolites. Stromatolites were able to spread globally because they had no predators at the time. This continued until about 700 million years ago. Stromatolites were widespread in the Precambrian, but are rare today. Living stromatolites were first discovered in Shark Bay, Australia. They've also been found in Yellowstone National Park. Next slide, please. In the Precambrian, there was very little oxygen, both in the sea and in the Earth's atmosphere. Both environments had high concentrations of carbon dioxide. Using chlorophyll through the process of photosynthesis, stromatolites use the carbon for food and release oxygen as a waste product. The great oxidization event occurred between 2.4 and 2 billion years ago, was a time of rapid buildup of oxygen. The oxidative weathering process of creating soil from rock began. At the start of the Cambrian, oxygen levels were at 15%, but by the end of the Carboniferous, 300 million years ago, the level was at 35%. Excuse me 1 second. Currently, the Earth's oxygen level is at 21%. Next slide, please. Stromatolites' second major impact was on the amount of suspended iron in seawater. The iron had come from volcanic activity in the Precambrian. Increased oxygen reacted with the suspended iron, forming extensive deposits of hematite in many sites, including Australia and in the Mesabi Range in Minnesota in the United States. These are called banded iron formation, BIF. They were deposited from 3.1 to 2.5 billion years ago. Once the suspended iron in the seawater was eliminated, oxygen was free to be released into the atmosphere. Next slide, please. Oxygen converted the suspended iron in the sea into these banded iron formations. At the end of this process, more oxygen could escape into the atmosphere, increasing its oxygen level. In the stratosphere, the ozone layer formed. The ozone layer reduced harmful UV rays, which would have prevented plants and animals from living on the land. Around 600 million years ago, animals used the oxygen in the sea to produce collagen to form their shell coverings and skeletons. From 635 to 450 million years ago, in the Ediacanarian period, scientists have found fossils of creatures that are unlike anything today, and it's not clear if they were plants or animals, in fact. Next slide, please. During the Cambrian period, there were no land plants at this time. The major marine plants were still algae. Algae is one of the large plant groups. Next slide, please. The first land plants lacked true leaves. They had chloroplasts in their stems for photosynthesis. The first leaves are found in the late Silurian Devonian periods. So during the Ordovician, the second major group of plants, bryophytes, evolved. These were mosses, liverworts, fungi, and slime molds, which made it to land. These simple land plants lived close to the water in wet places. They grew low because they lacked rigidity and were unable to move water. They had a hard outer coat to prevent water loss. They are rare as fossils. Next slide, please. During the Silurian, the oldest known vascular land plants were found in Australia. These plants had water-conducting tissues, and they usually had true roots, stems, and leaves. Cooksonia is one of these plants that's very famous for demonstrating this type of new vascular land plant. Next slide, please. You may be familiar and have heard the term the Rhynie chert. This particular plant is found in that chert. It's prevascular. It lives symbiotically with a fungus that helped it secure water and nutrients. It was a free-sporing land plant. We'll eventually return to this symbiotic relationship with fungi and plants. Next slide, please. In Gilboa, New York, a Devonian forest of tree ferns that were 26 feet tall has been uncovered. This is one of the first forests. The increased number of plants in the Devonian reduced the level of atmospheric carbon dioxide. This resulted in a drop in Earth's temperature to the present day levels. Previously, it had been much warmer. Next slide, please. So the original greening of the Earth occurred during the Devonian period. There was an increase in atmospheric oxygen. There was a reduction in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. All this resulted in a drop in Earth's temperature, and air-breathing animals evolved to breathe the oxygen in the air on land. They term this afforestation. Next slide, please. The Devonian period had widespread continents. In the late Devonian, Euro-America and Gondwana joined to form Pangaea. Plants developed lignin, which gave them rigidity to grow taller, improved the water movement in the plant, and protected it from diseases and plant-eating animals. These vascular plants moved inland away from the coastal edges. In the late Devonian, the level of oxygen in the atmosphere increased to over 13%. Wildfires are only possible at this oxygen level or higher. Finding fossil charcoal has confirmed that wildfires had occurred. This reduction of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere cooled the climate. Glaciation led to a massive extinction, the Kalwasser event, about 374 million years ago. In review, for 180 million years from the Ordovician, green algae gradually adapted to a life outside the sea to the land. In this very long process, plants evolved to stand upright, breathe in air, and disperse their spores. Vascular plants not requiring a wet environment spread from coastal habitats and formed extensive forests covering the continents. In the Middle Devonian, several groups of plants evolved to have leaves and roots. At the end of the Devonian, the first seed-bearing plants emerged. The explosion of plants during the Devonian period is known as the greening of the earth. Next slide, please. The next time period is called the Carboniferous outside of the United States. In America, the time is divided into two periods, the Mississippian and the Pennsylvanian. Vast amounts of coal formed in Northern Europe, Asia, and Midwestern and Eastern North America. In the Mississippian, North America became drier after being underwater. In the upper part of the Mississippian, conifers appeared. Plants were so abundant, they increased the atmospheric oxygen to 35%. Insects and other land-dwelling invertebrates grew to enormous size, such as dragonflies with a 2-foot wingspan. Globally, it was hot at 20 degrees centigrade or 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Next slide, please. In the Pennsylvanian period, glaciers caused seas to retreat. Their melting flooded the extensive cold forests. Plant material did not decay when seas covered them. It turned into peat. When the seas covered the swamps, marine sediment covered the peat. Pressure and heat over millions of years changed the plant material into coal. Swamp forests with seedless plants such as lycopods, lepidodendron, and sigillaria flourished and were the primary source of carbon for the coal. Coal beds up to 11 to 12 meters or 36 to 39 feet thick formed. Later, lycopods suffered a major extinction after a drying trend increased glaciation. Ferns and synapsids like horsetails, annularia, and calamites became more dominant, and the earliest relatives of the conifers appeared. Next slide, please. Lepidodendron was a scale tree. The scales the outer area had a diamond-like leaf scar pattern. The trees could be 160 feet tall, but they were not woody. They had a thick outer covering and a pithy central core. A related scale tree was Sigillaria, which had hexagon to near circular scape leaf scars in vertical rows. Both were like lycopodids. The lepidodendron also had a fruiting body and reproduced using spores. Next slide, please. The fossil Wallachia was a cypress-like conifer. It is found in the upper Pennsylvanian and lower Permian 310 to 290 million years ago in Europe and North America. Fossil trackways of tetrapods and the wingless insects have been found in Wallachia forests. It lacked branches and leaves on most of its trunk until the very top of the tree, which protected its leaves and cones from most herbivores. Next slide, please. In Java's Nova Scotia, early tetrapods have been found in stumps of upright fossil tree trunks. The trees were most likely to be sigillaria or club mosses. Tetrapods are four-limbed animals like amphibians and reptiles. Next slide, please. In overburdened dumps from coal strip mines in Mason Creek, Illinois, nodules of cedarite, which is an iron carbonate, often contain a tree seed fern leaf. There is also marine preservation of shrimp, worms, and a strange animal called the Tully monster. Multiple layers of coal and shale were laid down as the sea advanced and retreated 16 times. There are some surviving seed tree ferns today. Today's spore-bearing ferns evolved relatively recently in the last 70 million years. Ferns are now the second most diverse vascular plant to the flowering plants angiosperms. Ferns have 10,500 living species, and they outnumber the non-flowering vascular plants like lycophytes and gymnosperms. Next slide, please. Annullaria is the name for one type of leaf of the fossil Calamites plants. Calamites plants were like modern horsetail rushes, but some fossil horsetails grew up to 100 feet tall, whereas today they are 4 to 5 feet tall. Next slide, please. The Carboniferous period is often called the Age of Ferns. Neuropterus is a common fossil in the bituminous coal areas worldwide. It is an extinct tree seed fern that may be closely related to modern cycads. It grew in swampy forests and is the most abundant fossil in the Mason Creek flora. Next slide, please. Unusual preservation of tree fern plant fossils are found in St. Clair, Pennsylvania. They're preserved with a white coloration of prophyllite or aluminum silicate. These are from the Llewellyn Formation 330 million years ago. Tree seed ferns have large fronds as a crown at the top of the tree. So one of the things we need to bear in mind when we're looking at these leaves or fronds of these tree seed ferns, these are not the small ferns that you see today. These are tall trees that have all their leaves at the very top of the tree itself. Next slide, please. Glossopteris was a woody tree seed fern that grew to over 100 feet tall. It was the dominant species in the Permian. Its fossil distribution in South America, Africa, Madagascar, India, Australia, and remarkably in Antarctica provided evidence to validate the theory of continental drift, that all these land masses were once together forming Pangaea. In the mid-Permian 270 million years ago, there was a major transition from swamp-loving lycopods to more advanced conifers, which were ancestors to those of the present. Next slide, please. Pangaea existed as a supercontinent for 160 million years. There was increased erosion from runoff from the mountains that had formed by the continents colliding. Life had to adapt to more floodplain and delta environments and less shallow marine environments. An increasingly arid climate favored the evolution of seed plants, which had adapted to the arid environment. At its breakup in the mid-Jurassic 175 million years ago, the tearing apart or rifting of North America from Africa began the formation of the North Atlantic Ocean. The rifts also released large quantities of carbon dioxide, creating a very warm climate in the early Cretaceous. Mid-ocean ridge spreading also raised sea levels to their highest in the geological record, flooding the continents. The movement of continents to more temperate zones increased the diversity of angiosperms, which are flowering plants. The Panthalassa Ocean surrounded Pangaea while it was still together. Next slide, please. During the middle of the Permian, there was a loss of coal swamps and their plants. Conifers and other seed plants that were adapted to the changing, drier climate appeared and spread. Seed plants became more diverse. Vertebrate herbivores first appeared and affected plant evolution. Arthropod herbivores continued to evolve. Insects were the most important in the early Permian. Grasshoppers and cockroaches from the Pennsylvanian were joined by metamorphosizing insects like beetles. These affected plant and insect predation interactions and coevolution. The Permian ended with the greatest mass extinction known. Up to 90% of marine species disappeared. On land, insects and a variety of spore-bearing plants became extinct. Massive volcanic eruption from the Siberian traps released gases which changed the climate and poisoned the environment. This is a ginkgo leaf, as you can see there, that was occurred during that time. Next slide, please. During the Triassic period, 252 to 201 million years ago, a forest of conifer-like trees, Araucaria, were buried by a river and preserved by groundwater minerals that form colorful quartz, amethyst, and jasper. The lifting, this is the Petrified National Forest National Park. The lifting of the Colorado Plateau many years later, at 60 million years, broke many of the logs cleanly into sections like they were sawed. There are other petrified forests in the United States. I'm not going to show you pictures of them, but I will tell you what some of them are in case you would like at some point to visit them. In Yellowstone National Park in the Eocene at 50 million years ago, a volcanic eruption preserved trees in their upright position. We've already seen Gilboa Forest, that fossil forest in New York, which occurred at 380 million years ago in the Devonian. Ginkgo Petrified Forest in Washington State had sequoias and up to 20 other trees in addition to the ginkgos, formed in the Miocene 15 million years ago when volcanic ash and lava covered trees that had fallen into Lake Vantage there. There is the Mississippian Petrified Forest, was preserved 35 million years ago in the Oligocene. A flooding river created a log jam of fir and maple trees, covering them in mud. The Blue Forest of Eden Valley, Wyoming, was preserved 50 million years ago in the Eocene period, or epoch. The trees fell into a swamp, and they were covered with algae, which preserved the original bark. As the wood shrunk, the space was filled in by minerals, including blue agate. And lastly, the Yellow Cat Flat, Utah, has trees from the Jurassic Morrison Formation, which is 150 million years old. The trees are preserved with red, orange, and yellow-colored carnelian. And well, actually, there's one more. Finally, there's Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota with preserved metasequoia, which is the Dawn redwood tree. It dates to the Paleocene at 55 million years ago. Next slide, please. The Triassic period of 248 to 206 million years ago followed the biggest mass extinction from the Permian. This left the Earth relatively unpopulated and ready for new life. During the Triassic period, the first dinosaurs and the first mammals appeared. Many plant families had been culled by the mass extinction. Giant club mosses and horsetails went extinct during the late Permian, and new forms evolved during the Triassic. The Triassic was the beginning of a boom in conifers and cycads. Next slide, please. Horsetails were primitive vascular plants, and as it's shown, they were an important source of nutrition for plant-eating dinosaurs. They were fast-growing, and even if the dinosaur ate the above-ground plant, it would not kill it. The plant would regrow from underground runners called rhizomes. Dinosaurs appeared in the Triassic, and they increased in numbers and types in the Jurassic and the Cretaceous time periods. Next slide, please. Here we see, you might be familiar with the Norfolk Island pine and a fossil cone from the very same plant. During the Jurassic, 208 to 140 million years ago, even the higher lands were warm and humid with lush jungles covering the landscape. Conifers dominated as large trees. Some varieties are still living today. Cycads, ginkgoes, and tree ferns made up the forest. Smaller ferns made up the undergrowth. Next slide, please. The Araucaria, or monkey puzzle tree, could grow from 5 to 80 meters, 16 up to 260 feet, with a trunk 3 to 5 feet in diameter. Separate trees had male and some had female seed cones. So different trees had male or female cones. Some of the native tribes considered it a sacred tree. Its seeds were used as food, and there's some evidence that long-necked sauropods evolved to browse on the foliage of these tall trees, whose leaves are high in energy. Next slide, please. If you may not recognize that leaf, but that's a magnolia leaf. Magnolias are thought to be the most primitive of the flowering plant families. Their fossils date to the Cretaceous period. Other trees from the same period include sweet gum, sycamore, birch, and oak. Magnolias were pollinated by beetle-type insects attracted by their fragrant flowers. A monoecious plant, it had both male and female parts, but they did not mature at the same time to prevent self-fertilization. Next slide, please. In the Cretaceous, there were no bees yet. Flower pollination was done by flies, beetles, and moths. The magnolia's bright red seed pushed out from the pod. Here we see a modern magnolia seed pod and a fossil seed pod as well. Next slide, please. Petrified cycads were found in the Potomac Group Patuxent Formation at Schoolhouse Hill near Baltimore. We actually have in the Natural History Society a cycad that looks pretty much like the one you see in the picture. This was a time before the origin of angiosperms or flowering plants. There is little or no evidence of floating vegetation in freshwater. Scenes of the Apatosaurus in swamps feeding on soft water plants is incorrect. Next slide, please. About 200 million years ago, changes in some leaves enclosed their seeds for extra protection. Previously, seeds were exposed on the leaves. These types of plants more successfully reproduce and their numbers increase. Before flowering plants, the seed-bearing world was dominated by gymnosperms with cone-like structures, like pine trees and ginkgoes with separate male and female cones. There was a genetic modification transforming cones into flowers. Flowers were a key evolutionary innovation. There are now 400,000 species of flowering angiosperms, and they represent 94% of all vascular land plants. One of the angiosperm's three major divisions, eudicots, make up 75% of flowering plants. Flowers contain both male pollen bearing stamens and female carpels. Flowers are the reproductive organs of these plants. Charles Darwin called the sudden appearance of flowering plants the abominable mystery. The development of genetics has begun to unravel some of the mystery, but much remains unknown. And here you see an early late Cretaceous eudicot with China. And if you look in between the two major leaves in the middle, you see the flower there. Next picture, please. The oldest known fossil evidence of bees, these are bee burrows that you're seeing on the screen. And these trace fossil burrows, the bee larvae would mature undisturbed in these burrows. The only known bee that builds this type of nest is the sweat bee. This Patagonian Argentinian fossil is 114 million years old. It represents the coevolution of pollinators and flowering plants in the late Cretaceous. The actual oldest bee body fossil, Trigonia prisca, is from the late Cretaceous, 72 million years ago, and it was found in amber in New Jersey. Next slide, please. Ever wonder when grapes first appeared? The oldest grapes were found as fossils in India. At 66 million years ago, India was still an island. Grape seed was found in sediment that also contained fragments of dinosaur eggs and palm trees. It was an equatorial and tropical climate. Later, India collided with Eurasia, and it's likely that grapes were introduced into the northern hemisphere. Next slide, please. These are pine cones from the Cretaceous of Morocco. And just so you can see those. Next slide, please. Maryland has a dinosaur park that's Cretaceous in age of 150 million years ago. And as you can see in the picture, there the Dawn redwood seed cones for fossilized are found there. Carbonized wood, the lignite, is also found there. From Route 1 from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, Maryland is known as Dinosaur Alley. This former, the Maryland Dinosaur Park is a former pit iron mine. It's one of the most important dinosaur fossil sites. It has deposits of the Cretaceous Middle Potomac group's Arundel clay, which contains the remains of dinosaurs, trees, and plants that were washed into this cut-off bend in a river during flooding. The climate was suitable for meadow sequoia or dawn redwood trees. Some early flowering plants, cypress-like trees, ferns, ginkgoes, cycad-like plants, medium and low ferns, mosses, horsetails, and club moss fossils are also found at the Maryland Dinosaur Park. Next slide, please. What you see is the dinosaur, the tooth from a herbivorous dinosaur, which is Astrodon johnstoni, was first described sauropod from North America in 1865. It's been designated as the Maryland state dinosaur. Sauropods were browsers, and they used, if you could see, the tooth is cup-shaped, and they used them to scrape the leaves off of trees. Astrodon johnstoni roamed Maryland from 130 to 95 million years ago. It and other dinosaur fossils have been found at the Maryland Dinosaur Park. Next slide, please. So far, we've seen changes in plant type and means of reproduction from marine to land plants. We have traced the development of vascular tissues and the change from spore, naked seeds on leaves, to seeds in cones for reproduction. In the next geological period, the Paleogene, flowering plants will evolve and become dominant. Next slide, please. The effect of the Cretaceous-Paleocene asteroid impact resulted in a greenhouse climate with global temperatures between 75 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Tropical and subtropical forests grew dense in the absence of herbivores. Trees increased their height to reach for sunlight. Plants grew on other plants in response to less space on the forest floor. Disaster plants refilled the empty landscapes and crowded out many Cretaceous plants, which went extinct in the middle of the Paleocene. Ferns are the first species to colonize after forest fires. There is little evidence of open plains. Angiosperms continue to develop and expand with increased rainfall. Many fruit-bearing plants appeared in the Paleocene to take advantage of the newly evolving birds and mammals for seed dispersal. Many reptiles were wiped out. Small mammals survived and increased in variety and numbers. Co-evolved insects fed and pollinated the angiosperms. Predation by insects was especially high at the end of the Paleocene. At 56 million years, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, PETM, P-E-T-M, was the result of a huge release of carbon into the atmosphere. There was a quick and sharp 5-degree increase in temperatures, which persisted for the next 100,000 years. Completely different plants appeared during this time. Insect damage was extremely common, unlike before and after the event. In the picture here, well, in the middle, you see this round object. That's a nut. This plant was a nut-bearing tree. Next slide, please. Sassafras trees date from the early Eocene epoch, 56 to 24 million years ago. This particular species is extinct, but there are 3 living sassafras species in North America and Asia. Male and female flowers are on separate trees. Its roots produce chemicals that kill other plants. Allelopathic is the term. Oil from the plant has found to be carcinogenic, but its leaves are finely ground and are the fillet in filet gumbo. The tree grows from 30 to 60 feet in height. Next slide, please. 175 species of fruit and nuts have been found in the very diverse Clarno nut beds in northern Oregon. These include walnut, chestnut, oak, banana, kiwi, magnolia, sycamore, and palm trees. Insects, birds, and mammal fossils are also found. It had a semi-tropical temperature with 10 feet of annual rainfall. Next slide, please. This is the fossil plants and animals at John Day have been preserved in colorful layers of volcanic ash. The predominant plants were angiosperms, flowering plants, and gymnosperms that produce seeds without fruit, such as ginkgo and yews. Angiosperms make up 80% of all known green plants. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of a sycamore leaf and the sycamore balls, if you're familiar with, that are found at the John Day fossil beds at 44 million years ago. Next slide, please. While the Green River Formation is mainly known for its fossil fish, 276 leaves, seeds, and flower fossils have also been found in the fossil lakes, limestones, marls, and oil shales. Because various plant parts are not found together, it's difficult to identify the plant species. So here we have a fossil flower from the Eocene at Fossil Butte National Monument. Next picture, please. This spectacular fossil palm frond is also from the Green River Formation at Fossil Butte National Monument. Beautiful piece. Next slide, please. Florissant Fossil Beds National Monument in Colorado are also from the Eocene epoch. These beds preserve many types of plant and insect fossils. As you can see, all these different fossils in the picture. Next slide, please. The earliest known rosacea or rose and maple tree family fossils were found in the Eocene Florissant fossil beds, National Monument in Colorado. The beds were formed when volcanic ash fell into a lake and preserved the plant and animals of the time. This flower is from an extinct cocoa tree that is a member of the rose family. Next slide, please. Beautiful fossil. Fossilized redwood stumps are the main attraction at the Florissant Fossil Bed National Monument. And as you walk along the trails there, pieces of the fossilized wood look like somebody just chopped a tree down, and all these chips of wood are in the walkways there. Next slide, please. The earliest known maple was found in eastern North America. Maples were most abundant in the Miocene epoch, 23 to 5 million years ago. The form of the maple leaf has changed over time. Next slide, please. In the Miocene, the continents were almost aligned in their current positions. So we've gone from Pangea, where everything was together, to now having all these separate continents existing. Next slide, please. Few of us think about the importance of grass. Without the evolution of grasses, today there would be no popcorn, no cereal, rice, pasta, tortilla chips, no bamboo floors or clothes, no golf courses or lawns. Humans rely on grasses for food, yet 70 million years ago, there were no grasses. At 40 million years, in order to survive the low level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the warm, dry conditions of the tropics, the flowering plants called grasses developed new methods of metabolism. One new type of grass named C4 evolved in the late Miocene and expanded in the Oligocene epoch from 36 to 5 million years ago. Next slide, please. The C4 grasses in the Miocene dominated the globe. At 6 to 7 million years ago, the C4 grasses could process carbon at night, whereas the C3 grasses only could during the day. This gave them a significant advantage. Horses changed from browsing on tree leaves to feeding on grasses almost exclusively. These grasses absorb dissolved silica from the groundwater into and around their cells. These opal bodies are found as fossils called phytoliths. The phytoliths gave the grass more support and added protection from various diseases. But silica made the grass tough and harder to digest. Chewing on these grasses wore down the animal's teeth quickly. Animals that ate grasses needed stronger and longer teeth. Other animals developed new ways to digest the tougher grasses. Aerodactyls, like present-day camels, bison, sheep, and giraffes, developed two stomachs. They were able to get more nutrition from the grasses. These animals are called ruminants. Next slide, please. Phytoliths are microscopic particles of silica that form in plant tissues. Plants take in hydrous silica from the soil through their roots. Phytoliths from decaying plants are also found in soils. Next slide, please. This chart of horse evolution shows the horse's change from browsing on leaves to grazing on grass. At the end of the Miocene, 95% of modern seed plant families existed. In the sea, kelp forest appeared. Kelp is a form of a large brown algae. Sea otters and dugongs, which are related to modern manatees, lived in the kelp. Open vegetation systems such as deserts, tundra, grasslands, and savannas became more common than the closed vegetation such as forests. Next slide, please. This chart shows the evolution of the horse. It changed in its height, changed from having 4 toes to its toes fusing to form a hoof, and significantly changing its tooth size and length. Horses had flat-top teeth with enamel ridges to grind grasses. Their teeth grew longer and pushed up through their gums to keep up with increased wear. Predators had to evolve to catch the longer-legged, increasingly faster-running grazing animals. Dog and cat carnivores became the dominant predators in the Miocene. Next slide, please. In the Pliocene epoch, the earth cooled from the warmer Miocene. The cooling and drying of the earth may have led to the spreading of grasslands and savannas across most continents. The change in vegetation was the major factor in the rise of long-legged grazers that lived in those areas. The Panamanian land bridge linked North and South America, allowing the migration of plants and animals which previously were isolated. The mid-Pliocene at 4 to 3 million years ago was warmer than today. Plants and animals moved further north. Forests were replaced by grasslands, and grazers replaced browsers. Better fed grazers became larger and developed larger teeth suitable for their diet of silica-laden grasses. With their longer legs, they could walk further to new feeding grounds, and with their increased height, they could see the predators over the tall grasses and outrun them. There were no major plant innovations in the Pliocene. There was a gradual limiting of jungles and rainforests to the equatorial regions, while vast deciduous forests and grasslands expanded in North America and Eurasia. In the late Pliocene, ice increased at the poles and glaciers advanced. This was the beginning of the ice ages of the late Pliocene and the following Pleistocene epoch. Next slide, please. The Pleistocene epoch had 11 major glaciations and interglacial periods. Plants were extremely close to modern ones, such as conifers, pines, cypress, mosses, and flowering plants. These were plants that did not need large amounts of sunlight and heat. Due to water being locked up in glaciers, the sea levels were down by 120 meters or 394 feet. A land connection between Asia and North America was exposed. There were no major plant changes. Grasses and trees continued as in the previous Pliocene epoch. Tropical jungles and rainforests were limited to the equator. Deciduous forests, barren tundra, and grasslands were the features of northern and southern regions. Fossils of distinctive large mammals and birds, such as mammoths and mastodons, longhorned bison, saber-toothed cats, and giant ground sloths, are found in North America, Asia, and Europe. Native horses and camels galloped across the plains in North America. Giant stork-like birds with 25-foot wingspans stalked prey. At the end of the Pleistocene, all these animals went extinct. The horses living in North America today are descendants of horses brought from Europe. A controversial theory that the expansion of Homo sapiens caused the extinction of the large mammals is unresolved. The La Brea tar pits in California from 40,000 to 8,000 before the present is an outstanding example of plant and animal life in the Pleistocene. In Maryland, the Cumberland Bone Cave has yielded many mammal bones, including the saber-toothed cat and the short-faced bear. Next slide, please. In summary, we have seen cyanobacteria and algae as stromatolites in the Precambrian. These plants continue to the present. Early seedless plants like mosses, liverworts, fungi, and slime molds were the first to leave the sea and live on land close to the water. The greening of the earth had begun. As plants became woody and able to move water and nutrients, taller forms developed and moved inland. Some plants, gymnosperms, developed naked seeds on their leaves rather than using spores for reproduction. The naked seeds were replaced by protected seeds, and multicolored flowering plants covered the earth. Finally, grasses emerged to feed the new human animals. Scientists have recently relearned about the symbiotic relationships between fungi and plants. Underground, the thread-like mycelium of fungi connect the roots of trees. This is called the mycorrhizal network, or the wood wide web. It connects individual plants, transferring water, nitrogen, carbon, phosphorus, and other minerals. In return, the fungi absorb sugar from the plants. 90% of land plants are in mutually beneficial relationship with fungi. This knowledge may change our ideas about plants. That's the end of it. I hope you all enjoyed it. We learned something from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the wonderful talk, Tom. That was awesome.
Thank you. Any questions?
You, Tom. Coming back
Welcome.
from Sharon. Thank you so much. I've been on an incredible journey, and I also want to know where plants are going to go in the future. That's got my brain going. I wonder what the next plants are going to be. Mason, did we have any questions in the chat box?
We
now?
don't currently. Now is the time if people want to get questions answered before they go. It looks like George is raising his hand, so give him a chance.
Okay, George.
You're muted, George.
I have a comment. The megafauna extinction was first observed in North America, estimated roughly 13,000 years ago. And that's where the idea was proposed that it was human hunting that made the animals go extinct. But since that time, that extinction has been found in every continent except Africa. Africa still has its large cats and everything else. And around 2007, a theory was proposed, and I follow this one a lot, that an asteroid actually had impacted on the Laurentide ice sheet, roughly in the Great Lakes, and it shattered the ice, and that's why you don't find any crater. But when it blew out, it created all the Carolina bays that you find on the East Coast and in some places of the Midwest. So that's an alternative theory to the human extinction theory about what wiped out the large mammals and their predators.
Thank
Just
you.
a comment.
Tom, I missed something in the presentation while you were talking. When you started talking about the evolution and dominance of grasses coming onto the scene, you mentioned that there was a decrease in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And was there a reason why there was a decrease in carbon dioxide that led to the emergence of grasses?
It could be just because of the increasing amount of plants giving off oxygen that caused it to decrease the levels of carbon dioxide. And again, a lot of the carbon dioxide was a result of volcanic action or the pulling away of continents, releasing it. And that in these times, apparently, there wasn't any major release of carbon dioxide from any of those sources.
I have a question. So you had so much wonderful information here and a nice smorgasbord from throughout the history of the earth of different plants. If I wanted to learn more about plants from a certain time period or something, where would I go to look? Where'd you get this all this information?
From a number of different sources. The one thing I regret not doing is being able to post a list of papers and things. A lot of it you can start off with Wikipedia or something like that, and then you can go to Google and look up scientific papers about something specifically that you're interested in.
Thank you. That's a wonderful answer.
Tom, how many of the pictures that you showed us, how many of these plants do you have in your own collection?
Well, I've collected at St. Clair, so I have a number of plants from St. Clair. I have a wonderful Araucaria cone that I purchased. I've been to Florissant, collected there. I've also seen in Washington State, the forest there and the fossils from that. I've been to I've been out west, so I've had an opportunity to see a number of things. I do have some plant fossils from the Green River Formation from out west. And so, I have some Mason Creek nodules. I've never been able to collect there, but I picked up some over a period of time. And I have a huge stromatolite that I was sorry, if we had been in person, people could have seen and handled. I love stromatolites. I've also found when we went into West Virginia, we found some stromatolites there as well. So they've always intrigued me.
Yes, I believe that's the stromatolites that we have in the Natural History Society's collection from Western Maryland are the oldest parts of our collection that we have on hand. Is that correct, Tom?
I'm not sure. I don't know to that for sure. I saw the question about my mycorrhizal, I think is how you pronounce that. I don't know that we know if the fossil material is any different than today. I know there were some huge fungus that occurred early on, some of them 6-7 feet tall. It's amazing. I'm always impressed with the different talks that I've done, the symbiosis in a lot of cases. Sometimes it's more not, it's more than a symbiosis. Somebody's actually taking more than they're giving, but it's amazing the amount of symbiosis that occurs between not only plants and fungus, but animals living together and helping one another. But it's quite exciting to what they're looking at today with plant communication. Not only do they communicate to each other when they're being attacked by bugs or some disease or something like that. It's very fascinating. I think you probably, if you get into National Geographic or NOVA, you could probably find a program about that if you're interested in that information.
Doris has a question. She asked, is there any restriction in collecting fossils in the national park? And could you recommend local areas for collection specifically for plant fossils?
Well, yes, if you're in a national park, you can't collect from the national park. So, but usually there are off-site places where you can go or you can be a part of. For instance, in Florissant, there's a private quarry that you can go into and collect. As far as plant fossils go, George probably knows more about that than I do. In Western Maryland, I'm sure there are places for plant fossils. Unfortunately, St. Clair has been closed for a number of years. You can't get in there. But in Pennsylvania, you can find different sites where there's exposed shales that have the fossils, plant fossils in them.
Marla and Mason, you might want to take this time because there was a question about field trip and fossil collecting. Again, coming out and registering for the fossil trips that we have as a club, we only go to places where it is accessible and legal to collect fossils. I don't know if Marla or Mason want to mention anything about upcoming trips on that.
Well, I'd say, yeah, definitely get in on these trips. They're going to be super fun. We talked about the Devonian today. We have a wonderful Devonian site up in Beltsville we've got access to, where I'm sure, can almost guarantee at least a few people will come home with trilobites, and trilobites are always cool, which is the state fossil of Pennsylvania. We also have these trips to Scientist Cliffs, where a lot of people will come home with shark's teeth of many different types, including maybe, if someone's lucky, a nice big megalodon tooth, the largest carnivorous shark of all time. Our last trip, someone found a meg, even in a place where we didn't think we were going to find any. We also have those trips to Stratford, which is pretty much one of the best places to find shark's teeth. You can actually find lignite and other plant remains there too, if you're lucky. So yeah, I would definitely get in on those trips. And we have some more that we're sort of planning. We're throwing ideas around. If you guys have any other ideas, send them to me or to Bronwyn or to anybody in our club, and we'll look into it and see if we can get in there. So yeah, we have a lot of cool trips coming up. Keep an eye out for it on the website and also on our Facebook group, the NHSM Fossil Club Facebook group.
Marla, did you have anything to add on field trips since you're helping to coordinate those?
Well, I think Mason said everything there is to say about Scientist Cliffs. And St. Clair is closed. It's extremely difficult to try to get access. A few of us were able to get access this past June, but it was extremely difficult. It took a year of emails and telephone calls, and you're very restricted in how much you can collect and where you can walk to collect it. So it is a challenge.
George, you have something to say?
Yeah, just two comments. Tom, I know for sure that we have a stromatolite from the Kaiser Formation that was actually
Yes.
collected
Yeah.
in central Pennsylvania.
Oh,
And you know, I'm going through the collection trying to organize it, and maybe I'll find more that are there. And the other thing about collecting plant fossils, a number of years ago, I drove from Maryland on Route 48 to Morgantown, West Virginia, and I spent the night in a motel. But at every interchange, I stopped at the rock outcrops, like, you know, on the northern side when I was going west, and on the southern side when I was coming east. And I found a bunch of nice plant trunks more than anything else, like Calamites type trunks.
oh,
They're in the collection.
right.
Although we're not encouraging people to get out of their cars on the interstate and look for fossils. All right, any other questions for Tom or comments? This has been wonderful. It gives us a lot of information to kind of digest and go through. And to think about plants in new ways, which is always wonderful. Thank you, Tom, for putting this talk together and sharing it with us. And you'll be able to see Tom in 3D at Shark Fest. He will have a lot of different shark teeth out there. He'll be at the Shark Tooth Station. So if you want to learn about shark teeth, come on out to Shark Fest on August the 15th, and let everybody else know. I know that there's other people out there who love sharks that you know, and let them know that we're having a great event coming up, and they should come out and check us out. Remember, you have to buy your tickets ahead of time because it is a timed entry for that. If you want to catch the presentations online, there is a virtual option as well. Just head to our website at marylandnature.org to get all the information. Tom, thank you again, and everybody stay safe and stay well. We hope to see y'all very soon. Happy fossil hunting.
Thank you all. Enjoyed it.